Hey guys, today we're going to go over markers. We're going to talk about markers, the way fashion designers use them. I know that there are a lot of videos floating around talking about pros and cons of markers and uh, pros and cons of each brand, but this video is really going to be about how to shop for and use markers from a fashion designer's perspective. First of all, the number one thing that I focus on when buying a new marker is the color. And a lot of people are really brand focused, like they have a brand that they like to use and they shop within that brand. But I have a million different brands and I've been using them so much and so often that I understand them now. It's like when I pick up a Faber-Castell, I know what to expect. And to be quite frank, I highly recommend this practice for many of you because when you're working in the industry and your boss says, toss together some sketches real quick, here's a bunch of tools. They don't care if you're only used to Copics or only want your Prismacolors or what have you. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about it. But they will care if you throw a temper tantrum and say, I don't know how to use these markers, or these markers aren't giving me the results I like. Nobody cares. Your dumb excuses, nobody cares. So take some time to buy a few markers from a few different brands and get used to them and understand their pros and cons as the way you use them. Okay. For example, there's a certain brand that bleeds like crazy, but I like that for a very specific purpose. And so when I grab one of those, I understand the results I'm going to get. So I look for color first. When I am shopping for markers, what I like to do is gather swatches of the fabrics that I'm going to use for the collection. And I'm going to take a sheet of the paper that I'm going to use to do my sketches. I'm going to staple it or tape it to a hard illustration board. And then I'm going to take all these swatches and take the swatches to the store with me so that I can test next to my swatch. And it's too light. That's actually quite good. And then you can get accurate colors for your swatches. When you're in a pinch, you can use any old red for red fabrics, etc., etc. But when you can, it's better to get specific, precise colors for your design sketches. Color is the number one thing that people notice when they're shopping for clothes. When you go to the store, think about when you go to the store, you go and you already know that there are some colors that you just refuse to wear, whether you just think the color is awful or because it just doesn't look good on you. I'm never going to wear orange near my face. It's just never going to happen because it makes me, I don't know, it just makes me curl up and die inside. But orange looks great on other people, but not for me. So it doesn't matter if I think the cut of the jacket is amazing, the fabric is the softest thing that's ever been against my skin. That orange color is going to put me off. I'm never going to reach for it. So getting the color right is really important to the design process. And when you're doing your design sketches, understanding how the color works within the design and how the colors in proportion with the other colors work together is important. So I do stress that you get the correct marker for your fabric. When you're shopping for markers, the second marker you're going to get is your shadow color. So if you are going to be doing any kind of complete renderings of these designs, I recommend that you also get a shadow color. And with shadow colors, you have two options. You can pick grays or you can pick a darker color than your fabric. When you look at this is like a really beautiful, smoky, purpley gray color. And so I've been using these Prismacolor Warm Gray series. And this one is the 80%. And then I'm going to use the 90% for the shadows. When I'm testing the markers in the store, I layer the color on top of each other because that's how I'm going to use it in my rendering. So these work for me. However, let's say you're going to also use a beautiful poppy red for as part of your collection. If you were to take that and then shadow it with gray, you would really deaden the color. And why would you even try to design with this beautiful, vibrant color if you wanted to kill it in your renderings with the gray? What I would do is shadow with a darker version of that color. When you're shopping, you need to layer the colors on top of each other because this looks one way and then the red by itself looks completely different. So layer the shadow color on top of your fabric color to see how those colors work together. Important note, marker colors look different when they're dry. So when you're testing your colors, let the marker dry first before you make up your mind. The next thing to shop for is the type of tip. Here are a couple of Copics. This is a Copic and this is Copic Sketch. And these, they have the chisel tips, lots of control. It's broad so that you can cover a wide area. And then they come with a sharp, stiff, fine point for detail work. Some people prefer a brush tip. These are brush tips and there's some flexibility here. You see that bounciness? And so you can create fades and tapers. And if blending is gonna be something that's important to you, then I would recommend the brush tips. I also like brush tips when I'm rendering hair and when I'm rendering fur, which is basically hair. But I like getting that tapering tip for wisps of fur and wisps of hair and locks of hair. And you're not really gonna get those beautiful brushy things with the chisel tip, but it's gonna be a real bitch to cover wide surfaces with the brush tip, right? So think about what you need it for. If you are an outerwear designer and you're going to be coloring a bunch of coats, then it's probably the chisel tip is probably gonna be better for you. This is Faber-Castell, and they have these large pointy tips, which they're not my favorite. They're not as bouncy as other brush tips. These are Prismacolor brush tips, and these are extra bouncy, and you can get a lot of beautiful lines with them. But the ink on the Faber-Castells is really great, but the tip is kind of like this in-between. If you like the brush tip but don't want it super bouncy, then you can reach for one of these. These are Koi brand. They're brush pens, and again, they're brush tips. They're thinner. They're not as bouncy as the Prisma or the Copics. What I like about these is that they're pen size and not giant fat marker size. And some people, they don't really like trying to draw and manipulate renderings with a fat brush like this. They prefer, a pencil size marker like this. So these are a good choice. Chart packs are kind of a category of their own. I think their base solution is different. They stink in the best way possible. And, I'm kind of weird in that I really love the smell of gas stations and cigarettes. Probably not the best smells together, but I love weird smells. I love stinky marker smell. This is the stinkiest marker. I love them. And then they have really broad tips, which is awesome to cover big spaces. They also have really sharp really sharp fine point for detail work. When these chart packs are brand new, they bleed like nobody's business because there's just so much ink in them. And sometimes when I really need to cover the big spaces, like I used to be an outerwear designer, and so if I were doing a bunch of jackets, a fresh chart pack is the best because I could draw a sleeve and I could take my fresh chart pack and just fill this in and it would just bleed and fill the rest of the sleeve. I've had this marker for almost 10 years. And it's still so fresh because there's so much fluid in it. They're just really awesome. Speaking of bleeding, when you're first working with your markers, you should probably do a bleed test. And I like to check for bleed by taking a pencil and drawing a line on the same kind of paper you're going to be working on. And then just take my marker and bring it up right up to the line. And if it will bleed, it will go past the pencil line and then you can see how much it will bleed. This one won't bleed. If it were to bleed, you can accommodate for that by when you're coloring, you can just start coloring away from your pencil line and letting it bleed up to the pencil line. All these markers, again, you should buy a couple from each brand, get familiar with them and work with different tips because it doesn't matter who tells you what's good for this and what's the best for that. These are all opinions. And so you need to go and use the markers yourself and get a feel for how it works with your drawing style and your rendering style. Some of them are more expensive than others. For example, the Copics are fairly expensive, but they do have refills. The markers are like $5, $6, $7, depending on which sub-label you get and where you're shopping. These refills are $10 a pop, and it's a really good price considering how much ink is in them and how many times you can refill your marker. And I wouldn't get them for every single color. Like if you're just working with a specific color for a particular collection, like how often are you going to use this spring green? I don't know. But I would get the refills for, say, grays. This is a warm gray that I use often. Or flesh tones, things that you're going to use collection to collection. Black, grays, flesh colors, hair colors, things like that. And not that really precise, pretty pink that you use for one collection. Regardless of the brand, the number one thing that I hate about almost every single marker company is the labeling, the color on the marker. This is the color of the label. This is the color of the marker. Do they look remotely similar? No. How about this one? No. We could bitch and moan about marker companies and tell them to get their acts together about getting their labeling more precise, but I know that it is actually a difficult thing to print the correct color on this glossy paper for as many production runs as they need to run to service the entire world with markers. So there's no point in that, okay? What I like to do is to make marker charts for the colors that I have. And I group them according to colors, and I label them with the brand name and with the color number. Make these charts on the paper that you use the most often for your renderings. Another thing I like to do is I like to create these charts where these are flesh tones and hair colors, and I layer them together. Remember when I said when you're trying to find your shadow color, you need to layer them together to see how they work together? Same is true of flesh tones, and I keep these labeled. These three work together for a lot of Caucasian skin colors. So I have them labeled. And then, I have some Hispanic colors. I have some black colors, etc., etc. This is good for blonde hair. all that business, right? But keep them layered together so you know how they work together. And then my last and final tip to you guys, that's not true. I'm probably gonna come up with some other random thing that I forgot later on. I love keeping my markers organized because I have so many that, I mean, how am I supposed to keep track? So I keep them separated in these kinds of bins, and so it's really easy. Like if I'm looking for a green, these two little compartments are where I keep all my greens. So if they're not here, I need to go shopping for one. Oh, and I just thought of something else. See, this is what I do. Just because a marker is drying out doesn't mean it's no longer useful. I use almost dead markers to create fuzzy textures in my renderings all the time. And so what I would do is I would keep them and keep these labeled as, you know, mark them as dry as they are. You know, you can update your marker charts and make sure you show that these are the dry ones so that you know which ones can be used for texture. And that's it. I'm sure as soon as I turn this video camera off, I'm going to think of 5 more things, but I believe this video is long enough, and so if I have to do a part 2, so be it. But for now, that's it. How to shop for markers. Go to the store, take your fabrics with you, figure out what colors you're going to use for shading, experiment with different brands to find the ones that work best for your rendering style, and hit the subscribe button because pretty soon I am going to start posting some tutorials and time-lapse videos on rendering with markers, rendering different textures. I'm going to teach you guys how to do denim and shiny things and fuzzy things, all kinds of things with markers. So I will see you next time.